For those who are new to Books and Bagels, what we're doing is this event is an interdisciplinary research talk between different departments. So what we want is graduate students to come up from different departments, from different disciplines, and talk about the kind of work that they're doing, and share it with not just their departments or their friends, but share it with a larger audience at Drexel. So what we have today are three different speakers from three different fields. We have Deepak Siromani, who is going to be talking about aircraft safety, and might actually scare some of you guys. We have Monique, who is from the department from Lebow School of Business, and she's in the Department of Marketing. And then we have Vishal, Kasliwal. Oh, sorry. He's from the Department of Physics, and he'll be sharing some of his research as well. So without much ado, I would want to introduce Dr. Barabara Hornum, who's from the Center of Academic Excellence and also professor at Anthropology.
Thank you. But one of the reasons that I accepted this was I think it's exciting that in a way you're all, whether you know it now or not, and whether you do it in academia or in industry, are preparing in some ways to be future faculty. And secondly, the whole notion of the interdisciplinary application of work that's often done within silos in specific disciplines, I thought was going to be very interesting. So when you're listening, you may want to sit and think a little bit about what kinds of applications in your own graduate programs you might be able to see possibilities from the descriptions of your fellow graduate students. And I'm just going to turn it over to the first one. I will, at the end of each presentation, throw out a thought question to think about or answer. We may have room for one audience question then, and then hold the bulk of them to the end of all three presentations. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming for this. So my name is Deepak Siromani. I am a PhD candidate in the MEM department. And just a little bit about myself. I've been at Drexel for a long, long time, as some of you may know. Some of my friends joke about how half of Drexel's campus has come up after I joined, which is partially true. So I did my bachelor's here, came back to my master's, and then ended up sticking around for my PhD. So I'm looking at getting done soon. Hopefully it should be done this year if all goes well. And so today I'm going to talk to you about, a bit about aircraft safety and particularly crashworthiness of aircraft. So some of the other guys in my lab, Vanchu's over here and no Vanchu's here, they work in keeping aircraft up in the sky and preventing them from falling out. But when their research goes bad and an aircraft does crash, that's kind of where I come in. But all jokes aside, that's kind of what happens. I'm going to start off with just giving you a quick introduction into what crashworthiness is. So when we talk about crashworthiness, we're talking about survivable impact. You're not talking about like a mid-air collision or an aircraft falling out of the sky, because that's typically not a survivable crash condition. So you're looking at velocities that exist during takeoff or landing, and those are actually considered survivable impact conditions. So on the left here, I have some examples that you guys might be familiar with. There was the US Airways crash into the Hudson River in 2009, termed the Miracle on the Hudson, where everyone did survive. And the next one down there, which was the crash into outside of Amsterdam, the Turkish Airlines crash. Most people did survive that. There were unfortunately a few fatalities. But crashworthiness doesn't only deal with commercial airliners that you and I fly. It's very applicable, if not more applicable, to small aircraft, and particularly military aircraft. In fact, between 2001 and 2009, there was a study report to Congress that found that the military had lost 375 rotorcraft, causing 496 fatalities. And apparently, a high number of these fatalities were actually considered survivable because they resulted from the direct impact event and not from any other factor. So that report identified rotorcraft crashworthiness as one of the most important factors to improve survivability. Now, Now, how many of you, many of you have probably seen car advertisements talking about car crashworthiness, impact tests and stuff done in cars you get right. And that's very common because the automotive industry is very heavily regulated as far as crash safety goes. In fact, they do many tests like this, cars going frontal impact, side impact, they study the overall crash safety of the car, airbag deployment, what happens to the crash test dummies inside, how every little piece of the car flies at you. And then they develop very complex computational models to study different design alternatives. So this is the automotive industry, and it's very far ahead in terms of crash safety. How many of you have seen something similar done with aircraft? Anyone? All right, one person. So yeah, so that's also because it's very rare. The aircraft industry, as you can imagine, does not really have as much regulation when it comes to crash safety. There have been a few crash tests done, primarily by the FAA, NASA, and the Department of Defense, on a very few type of aircrafts. They're usually small aircraft, regional jets like the ATR, helicopters, and sections of large aircraft. The problem with this, and the reason why you don't see more of them, is because it's very expensive to continuously perform such tests. So the idea is that you have a few tests, you develop a few computational models that you can use to further study these impact conditions and different design modifications, blah blah. So these tests had some basic computational models developed to simulate these impact conditions, and in theory can be used to simulate other impact conditions so you can study the safety of different types of aircraft. So the one that I'm going to talk about today was done as part of a collaboration between the FAA and Drexel. This was done in November of 2000. I was still in high school then, I wasn't here. But the test was done on a 10-foot long section of a Boeing 737 that was cut out of right in front of where the wing box ends. And they took this 10-foot section and dropped it from a 2-story height. They put crash test dummies in there, luggage underneath the passenger floor, and a whole bunch of instrumentation to record all sorts of data. So I'm just going to quickly show you a video of this drop test. Quality isn't that good for this one. Apparently cameras weren't that good back in 2000. But I do have a slow motion drop test as well, a video of the drop test as well. So this, the main thing to notice here is how the area underneath the passenger floor collapses the most and gets crushed the most. And that's where all the luggage is, and this is very important, as I'll explain in a few slides later down the line. So my predecessor, a PhD student in our lab, worked on this drop test, and he developed a very complex finite element model, a computational model to simulate this drop test. And this model was very accurate. It was able to capture all the various types of deformation and loads and everything that was experienced, that was recorded during the test. So then I came along and decided to try and use his model to study different types of impact conditions. So we're looking at different types of surfaces and different types of angles of impact. But I very quickly realized that you can't use a 10-foot long section to study an aircraft under realistic impact conditions. You can see from some of these videos it tends to topple over and do all sorts of funny things. So it's not very useful in that sense. So I worked on for one, I had to expand this to a full-length fuselage model. And to do that, I first had to simplify the original model that was developed, primarily because computer time is expensive. It takes a long time to run these models. And a 10-foot long model takes about 2 days on most computers. Well, it depends on your configuration, but it took about 2 days on the computer I had at the time. So a full-length model would take about 2 weeks, and I couldn't afford that. So we scaled this down a bit, and I had to simplify it, make sure that my model captured the overall same deformation, same characteristics as the original model did, and then expand that out to a full-length fuselage, which is what you see down here. And the idea was that we use this simple fuselage model to study different impact terrain. So water, soft soil, and compare that to a hard surface impact like landing on a runway. And one thing you notice is that it is a very simple model. You don't see the wing box, you don't see any of the landing gear, anything that you'd see in a real fuselage section. And the reason for that is working with the aerospace industry, it's very hard to get any type of geometry out of them. It's they're very everything is proprietary, so you can't really get much out of them. But we could use this simple model to study impact conditions similar to the examples I showed you in the beginning. And these models give us a lot of valuable information on how the structure deforms, subjected to different types of impact terrain, different angles of impact. You can look at more detailed views and see how every single component reacts to the different impact conditions. So that's all well and good. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the one common thing we noticed through this study was, interestingly enough, the effect that the luggage had on the overall behavior of these aircraft sections. So if you remember, when I showed you that drop test, there was luggage that was packed underneath the passenger floor. It turns out that this luggage actually absorbs a lot of the impact energy. So we ran a couple of simulations with and without luggage and compared those. And what you see is, for the simulation on the right without luggage, there's far more catastrophic and severe deformation to the fuselage structure. And that's bad, because what happens is, if you look at the loads that are passed on to the passengers, when you remove luggage from there, you have about a 5 to 10 G extra load that gets passed up to the passenger. Now, in a car crash, what usually kills an occupant or injures an occupant is the head impact. It's frontal impact, so something happens to your neck, it's fine. But in an aircraft crash, what injures you is the lumbar load, the load that goes up the back of your spine and crushes your spine. So when you remove that luggage, you have a much higher load spike that ends up going to the occupants. And if you look at the amount of energy absorbed, the luggage actually absorbs 40 to 50% of this impact energy. So when you remove that, all that energy has to go somewhere else. So it goes into breaking up the fuselage even more, and a lot of it gets passed on to the passengers as well. So the moral of the story is, next time you fly, you might want to pay the $25 and check in your luggage. But jokes aside, you can't really count on checking in your bags to save yourself in a crash, right? So the idea is that you really need some kind of energy absorption devices that are integrated into this region that can do the same thing as the luggage does. So you have, most aircrafts have some kind of supporting structures underneath the passenger floor that you see here. It's called stanchions. So if you use composite materials as a structure for these, composite materials are, for one, they're very strong, and two, if they're designed correctly and they fail the way you want them to, they will absorb a lot of energy. So it turns out that if you, in a similar 10-foot section, if you put in about, I think, 14 to 18 stanchions, you can absorb the same amount of energy that the luggage does. So, but the thing is, as I said, you need to be able to control how these things break apart and fail. And that's where these failure trigger mechanism thingies come in. So we did a whole study on trying to figure out what the best option was when it comes to damaging these specimens enough so that they would fail the way we want them to fail. So, again, as I said, we did a bunch of experiments on various cross-sections, various failure trigger mechanisms. And again, since experiments are expensive, we developed computational models to go along with these. And the idea is that you can use these computer models to test out different cross-sections, different types of composite structures, and determine which are the most energy absorbing structures and use those as your energy absorbing devices. So the next step, ideally, is, since you need to be able to fit these into the aircraft structure, the next step is trying to figure out how these things attach. And there are many complex issues with how you fit these things into the frame of the structure, what kind of rivets and hylocks you use. So that we did some work in that as well. I'm not going to go into that detail today, but I have some information if anyone's interested. So that's all I have for today, and with that, I will take any questions.
Did you want to take a question from them? You can have one from them instead of me.
Oh.
it looked that with the luggage, there was still a difference depending on where the seats were located. Whether they were on the edges or the center. Is that valid? In other words, not looking at what you're showing and using the right conclusion that I want to sit in the middle.
So, yeah, depending on, regardless of whether you have luggage or not, different seats get a different amount, a different type of load passed up to them. Generally, the aisle seats are safer. What ends up happening is, in the simulations I showed you, and I kind of skipped this, but the 10-foot section that we were modeling had a cargo door on one of the sides. So this cargo door has a reinforced frame around it. So that's what, if you notice, that caused the whole fuselage to kind of tilt over a bit. So all the seats that were right above the cargo door had a slightly higher acceleration, the load pulse that was sent up to the passengers. So yeah, it's not something you can say is constant throughout the frame, depending on where you are. If you're sitting in front of the aircraft or in the back of the aircraft, it will differ.
We have time for one more question. Why don't we get somebody who's not a panelist?
So it looked like all of your fuselage simulations were for planes. I was wondering if you looked at doing any simulations for aircraft.
Yeah, so the reason why I stuck with the frame was just because that's what we had validated simulations for. So we had something to compare, to use as our baseline and compare our values with. The exact same methodology that we used to set up this simulation can be easily transferred over to a rotorcraft. But the problem is we need them to give us the correct cat file, the correct geometry. So until then, it's kind of pointless just making up geometry and then trying to simulate that. But yeah, so you can use the same methodology.
Again, my name is Monique. I'm from the marketing department here at Drexel, and I'll be talking with you about some of my dissertation research. Just to give you a little bit of a background on me, my research areas are primarily marketing communications and marketing strategy. And before coming back to get my PhD, I worked for about 8 years in industry, in corporate communications, PR, marketing, community relations, all those fun areas. And the one thing I can say about my short career in industry is that I always seem to be working for companies that were in transition. So as soon as I joined them, it seemed like chaos broke out at the company. So I don't think it was me, but I think I was fortunate to have those experiences because it really showed me the role that marketing can play in helping all kinds of stakeholders navigate those changes. And that was a big part of my role, was communicating to the various stakeholders, including employees, customers, the public, all kinds of suppliers, all types of stakeholders about what the company stands for. So that really has led to my interest in my current dissertation research, which looks at organizational values and their impact on marketing outcomes. So what are organizational values? They really refer to the means and the ends that the company wants to achieve. So it's both what objectives the company decides to pursue and how they'll achieve those objectives as well. As I said up here, it has to do with which outcomes are worthwhile and how to achieve them. You can also think about organizational values as enduring principles. They're kind of the compass that guides the company as they make decisions and as they operate within the So just to give an example, to put it in our own terms, let's say that you have a value of achievement. You know, you want to get ahead, you're a graduate student, you want to do big things, but you also have a value of concern for others. So you want to help your friends, you want to make the world a better place. So let's say that you have an instance where tomorrow you have an exam and you need to study, but at the same time your friend has an emergency and needs your help. That's when your values come into play. You have to decide which value is going to be stronger. Your achievement value, your desire to succeed and do well on that exam, or that desire to help your friend. So values are all desirable, but they're always competing with one another. So why shift organizational values to marketing? Well, from the firm perspective, as I said, the values guide decisions that the executive team makes, and it guides where the executive puts their attention. So that can have long-term effects for how the company performs. And also, organizational values are used by employees to guide their behaviors. Just like as a student, you would make that decision about which value are you going to pursue. Employees make those same decisions every day when they're dealing with their customers. Are they going to put the company ahead of the customer, or the customer's needs ahead of the company? So all of those are always in play. Also, more recently, there's the idea of the mindful consumer. So there's a lot of literature that's coming out in marketing now that says that we're making purchases not just based upon the actual product or brand that we're buying, but we're also considering the company behind that brand and what that company stands for. Whether it's happening consciously or unconsciously, we're thinking more and more about the products that we buy based upon the company behind them and what that company stands for. I'll just quickly throw out to you guys, do you think that's something valid when you make a purchase? Do you often think about the company behind the brand, or do you I just want this brand and it doesn't matter? Anyone can answer. Anyone?
Yes.
Depends on the price, okay, so it depends on the price involved, but there's a number of factors. But literature and research is showing that that's more of a consideration for contemporary consumers. So part of the motivation for my study is that this is happening in the marketplace, that organizational values are coming more to a forefront. And I wanted to see that since they're coming to the forefront, does that have implications for marketing? And I use a quote here from Pepsi's CEO, who's introduced the performance with purpose strategy. And performance with purpose, she says she wants to grow the company by creating a healthier planet, doing well by doing well on the planet. So she said in her quote, I came to the Yale School of Management and it stressed one thing in their business education then and it does now. When running a company or part of a company, you have to focus on the shareholder. There's no question about it. But there's more to a company than just the shareholder. There's a multiplicity of stakeholders and you've got to worry about all of them, because when you're worried just about today and just the shareholder, you don't want to add cost to society that somebody else has to clean up. So I think this is a good quote because one, the CEO is saying that she wants to achieve her performance goals by also considering the well-being of the planet and thinking outside of the building. I also think it's important because she's considering other stakeholders. Traditionally, just as she said, we are only thinking about the shareholder and making the investors happy. But the CEO is taking the stance that we can achieve all of our performance goals and at the same time think outside of the building and think about the community. P&G is also taking the same tack. And there's also recent popular books, one called Marketing 3.0 by marketing guru Philip Kotler, who says that marketing has gone from being product-centered, so just making the product the best product possible, to being customer-centered, so getting insight into the customer actually wants, to being values-based. So thinking about, again, those organizational values and how those are going to connect with the consumer. So my research questions basically come down to, do organizational values influence marketing outcomes? Which of those values should matter most to marketing? And are purpose or transcendent values beneficial? And what I mean by purpose or transcendent values is just what I talked about with Pepsi's CEO. She's saying she wants to make the world a better place at the same time that she achieves her profitability measures. So when companies talk about purpose, when they talk about caring about the environment, environment, when they talk about helping the communities in which they operate, that's what I mean by those purpose or transcendent values. And I want to see, does that make a difference to consumers? So in order to do that, I tried to look at the current organizational values frameworks within the management literature. But when I tried to look at those frameworks, they only considered internal stakeholders. So again, they were very focused on the shareholders and employees. But as you know, marketing is also concerned about customers and the general public. So what about those external stakeholders? Why aren't they considered in the existing frameworks? So in order to kind of mitigate that problem, I went to the psychology literature and found Shalom Schwartz's theory of universal values. Shalom Schwartz is a psychologist who's done studies all over the world with all types of people, different cultures, and he's found that there's basically 10 values that are universal to all human beings that we all strive for. And those 10 values that you can see here, self-direction, universalism, that has to do with caring about others and caring about the outside world. Benevolence is caring about those closest to you. Conformity and tradition, security, power, achievement, hedonism, and stimulation. So those are the 10 or sometimes 11 values that he talks about relating to all human beings. And they're grouped into 4 categories, as you can see here. So I matched the existing frameworks up to Schwartz's framework, and they all fit perfectly. I was able to subsume those current organizational frameworks into his. But what was missing from the current frameworks was all of these values related to self-transcendence. So again, universalism, caring about the world at large, caring about nature, and benevolence, caring about those closest to you. So I took Schwartz's framework and have created a stakeholder organizational values framework where I look at organizations based upon his values theory. Here's my model. I know we're limited on time, so I won't get into all of the details, but I'm taking a look at the firm's organizational values emphasis. So whether they're more, they have a higher level of self-transcendence or a higher level of self-enhancement. And I hypothesized some marketing outcomes. So I hypothesized that a firm that has a strong emphasis in self-transcendence will likely have greater customer satisfaction and greater character reputation. The short explanation for that is that these values translate into behaviors. So if you're concerned about the well-being of others, you're concerned about the environment, you're likely to behave and operate in ways that lead to customer satisfaction and character reputation. Likewise, self-enhancement, which has to do with power, dominance, wealth, in business terms, profitability, market share. If your organization is more focused on those types of values, you're likely to have greater capability reputation. And just to differentiate between these 2 reputations, character reputation has to do with evaluations of what you're likely to do, how you'll behave. Are you going to be opportunistic? Are you going to treat your employees fairly? All of those things that have to do with how you're going to behave. Your capability reputation has to do with what you're able to do. Are you going to perform? Are you going to deliver on time? Do you have the resources? Do you have a competent management team? So that's my model, and I've begun testing it using regression analysis. I have a sample of about 100 Fortune 500 firms. In order to approximate organizational values of the firm, I'm using a computer-aided content analysis of the CEO's letters to shareholders. And what that is I created custom dictionaries that look for certain keywords and give me a word frequency count. And that can translate into whether the firm appears to be more self-transcendent or more self-enhancement oriented. For my dependent variables, capability reputation, I'm using the Fortune's Most Admired score. And for character reputation, I'm using a media favorability score, where I took a look at all of the articles about that firm within a year's time and processed them again through a computer-aided content analysis, which gives it either a favorable or unfavorable, which I'm using as a proxy for the character reputation. And then lastly, customer satisfaction is simply using the score from the American Customer Satisfaction Index, which is widely used in the literature. So far, I've with just the raw data that I have so far, there's been a positive correlation between those transcendence values as they appeared in the letter to shareholders and the customer satisfaction score. And there's also been a significant correlation among those values that are said to be related in Schwartz's framework. So, good news on that front. But there's a lot more work to do. I have to really refine the data, include some industry controls. I'm also expanding it to be a longitudinal study, so I have to collect 1 more year of all those data points. I was recently given a grant, so I'm thinking about doing some actual manual coding because you do lose some richness of the data, some context when you use a computer software to do the analysis. And then I may expand the study to do some primary data, which may include collecting some survey data from firms or doing an experiment. So the implications are that my new framework provides a way to understand organizational values as a strategic marketing resource, and it highlights the potential advantages of selecting or emphasizing specific values in terms of those outcomes of customer satisfaction and corporate reputation. So thank you so much for your time. Are there any questions? Actually, I did see between self-enhancement and character recognition. So the firms that are more focused on that power, dominance, wealth did have a lower, more negative character recognition. Yes. Thank you.
We have time for one audience question.
Good.
Thanks for such a great talk. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how this might change or differ with small organizations, local kind of companies.
That's a good question. I do have one moderator that I didn't talk about, but it's still a Fortune 500 firm, but I want to consider whether if that firm is a domestic firm versus multinational. And I think what I postulate is that if the firm is domestic, that their good deeds are kind of emphasized. So if they have transcendent values, they're even amplified more because those customers can actually feel the effects of that good behavior. So that's kind of the direction I've been going, but that's a great question.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have time for you to ask questions of everybody when our last presenter concludes.
So this is my second Bagels talk. Out of curiosity, other than my friends and my seniors here in the audience, have any of you been to my previous talk? I just want to know it. Oh yes. Anyone else? No? Okay, so this actually means that I get to give you guys all the filler stuff at the beginning once again, which makes my life easy. So that's awesome. So I study physics. I work for Dr. Michael Berkeley and also partly for Dr. Robert Richards. They're both astrophysicists here at Drexel, and they're big guys in the field, so it's a lot of fun to work with them. I am looking at things that are known as AGNs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about what they are. I'm going to tell you about what it is that I care about, and then I'm going to discuss how it is that I study them. Okay? So when you look up at the sky, you see galaxies out there, and you see some nice galaxies that look all regular, and you see some galaxies that seem to have this bright central spot. And this bright central spot also something shows up all by itself. So these are called normal galaxies. These are called active galaxies because they are active, they do stuff that makes them interesting. And these are called quasars because they're quasi-stellar. So now we know that quasars are really just normal galaxies where the center is so bright that you can only see the center, you don't see the rest of the galaxy because it's so far away that all the other stars, they don't even give off enough light for us to be able to see them from here. Okay? Now just to give you some idea as to how much light we're talking about here, can anyone tell me, someone who's not an astro, can anyone tell me how many stars an average galaxy has, like order of magnitude? Millions, thousands, hundreds, tens?
Millions.
Millions? You say
Hundreds
millions?
of millions.
Hundreds of millions. Sorry?
I would say billions.
You would say billions? Anyone else? Okay, so it's actually in the 10 to 100 billion star range. So our galaxy has like 100 billion. There's some that have, more than that. There's some that have less than that. Okay. Now, for the center to outshine the rest of the galaxy is incredible, because you're saying that there's something out there that outshines, 10 billion stars, 40 billion stars, 100 billion stars. So then you start asking yourself, what is it that makes so much light in the center? And the first thing that you do is you try to work out how big that thing is. And it turns out that that thing is ridiculously tiny. That thing is about the size of our solar system. So there is something out there the size of our solar system that produces more light than 100 billion stars put together. Okay, so what is that thing? Well, it turns out that it's a black hole that is eating stuff. Okay? So there's a huge big black hole at the center of almost every galaxy out there. And when stuff falls into that black hole, the stuff doesn't just sort of fall in. Okay? It goes in like water going down the sink. So the outsides are moving slower than the insides are. And so there's friction, viscosity, friction, and that causes the same thing to happen that happens when you rub your hands together. Your hands become warm. So the stuff, as it falls in, heats up to, millions of degrees Kelvin, and it glows and gives off lots and lots of radiation. And it's kind of nice because, it gives off radiation, not just that radiation that our eyes can see, but it gives off radio waves, it gives off infrared, it gives off ultraviolet, X-rays, you name it, and, AGN gives that stuff off. Okay? So going back to some actual pretty pictures, these are not as pretty. This is a normal galaxy. It has this number called 3277. NGC stands for New General Catalog. It's not very new at this point. It's about 150 years old. This is NGC 5548, which is an active galaxy. And you can see that there is this bright thing in the center. These, by the way, are what are known as diffraction spikes. They're not real. They just show up because you look at them, you look at the galaxy through a special kind of telescope. Okay? They won't show up with, say, the spyglasses that pirates use. Okay? Alright, so active galaxies. Now what do I care about? What I care about is how stuff falls into the galaxy. Okay? So there are many different ways that stuff can fall into the black hole. So it could just all fall in like this from every possible direction, or it could sort of swirl around. Now when stuff swirls around, it will fall in the form of a disk. Okay, so we call one form of accretion Bondi accretion, spherical accretion, and the other one we call just disk-like accretion. And when things just fall in like this, right, you have to ask yourself, where does the energy release come from? Okay, because when things fall in a disk, right, there is viscosity, there's rubbing, and that heats the disk up, and that gives off energy. Okay, but when things just fall in from all sides, there's not much rubbing going on, and so you won't release as much energy. And that sort of explains why it is that the Milky Way does not have one of these ridiculously bright accreting black holes at the center. So if you sort of work out how much stuff you have to throw into the black hole every year to make enough radiation for us to see it here sitting on the Earth from the Milky Way, it turns out it's not very much. It's like 1 Earth mass. And 1 Earth mass is not that much at all. So, it's hard to believe that there is less than 1 Earth mass falling into our Milky Way's black hole. And so the only reasonable explanation is that when stuff falls into the black hole at the center of the Milky Way, it just does not give off as much radiation because it's not falling in a way that's conducive to producing radiation. Okay? So let's assume for a second that we're looking at galaxies with nice disks. Okay? With nice disk-like accretion going on. And we look at the light coming from the center, right, from this accreting black hole. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot how much light I'm receiving as a function of time. So this is in days, by the way, and this is in electron counts. It doesn't matter, it's how the instruments work. Okay? But what you see is that you don't get this nice sort of flat line that tells you, oh, it's glowing like a light bulb. Instead what happens is that the source flickers, and it flickers very rapidly. You can see that, if these are in days, 1 day is about this much, and you do actually see variations on day-to-day scales. You see